Hi guys, it's Rowan Eagles here again, and I'm with a friend Lee, who's just going to share a bit of a testimony of how he came to the Lord and how he became conscious of that God was real and that Jesus could be Lord of his life. So Lee, what did you want to...
Well, it started when I was about 5 years old.
Yep.
It's quite funny being that old, being 5, but my parents weren't believers at all. They were heathens. I never even heard the name God. My dad never even mentioned the name or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was about 5 years old, and me and my two mates went out in the bush and started playing around and shooting stuff with a bow and arrow that his old man got from New Guinea.
Oh, okay.
Had poison tips on it, all the fruit, with
an
ornament on the back wall. And his old man and mum went out for the day. We went out shooting stuff in the trees and stuff, whatever. Anyway, probably about an hour later, my mate had shot the arrow into the bush and lost it. And I started crying. 5 years old, what else would you do? I think his old man's going to kill him when he gets home.
Yeah.
So just out of the blue, I'd never spoken to God in my life, never heard his name, nothing. I just looked up at the sky and said, God, look, my mate's in trouble. I don't want him to get belted by his dad when he gets home. His old man was a sergeant in the police force, bit of a hard boy. So I said, God, can you help us find it? And I looked down at the ground, and the arrow was next to my right ankle and foot. So I grabbed the arrow and, like, Russell, Max, I found it, and I hadn't even moved. So anyway, after all the dilemma, we hung it back on the wall so no one knew that we'd taken it and whatever. I went home, and after that, slowly but surely, as the time went on, I'd become a believer and didn't know why or how.
So at that time when you found the arrow, after calling out to God, to help you, did you, were you amazed that you called out to God and then suddenly it was just there?
But when you're 5 years old, I think because you don't take things so seriously, it was quite an easy thing to do. Like saying, asking for a biscuit from your mum is no different. So for me it was quite easy. I just said, hey God, my mate's in trouble, he's gonna get the living daylights belted out of him by his dad. And can you help us find the arrow? And I looked down and I was amazed that it was not over there. After I looked for half an hour, it was actually right there. That's what that was the miraculous part that got me on the trail, thinking, hang on a minute, there's a bit more to it than the normal. So then as my life went on, I had always believed in God from that day forward. I spoke to him every day. I, always asked him.
So you started forming a relationship.
Yeah, and then as I got older, I was in my, sort of like late 20s, I think, when I was about to get married, and I'd had a lot of experiences with God before that. And then an amazing thing happened. I started to hear his voice a bit more often, a bit more audibly.
You used to hear his voice. So how do you know it's not like a thought in your mind? How do you know you're sure that it's actually God?
It's funny. What happens is it's when you're silent. It's not when you're working. It's not when you're talking to someone. It's when you're silent. So the most memorable one for me was that I was driving down the freeway in South Perth, heading home, and the fork in the road split. One goes to Charles Street, one goes down to West Perth, and all that sort of stuff. And I was right just before the split in the road, and God just said, clear as a day, turn left and go to King Edward Hospital.
Right.
And I thought I was hearing things. That's the last thought I would have thought driving along this road. So anyway,
he just said turn left and go to a particular hospital. And did you know who was at the hospital?
No, I didn't know.
No,
it wasn't until I got there that I realised while I was there.
Okay.
So what happened was one of the neighbours' daughters who had a baby. Now, so I turned left, and he said, go to King Edward Road Hospital. I didn't even know where it was, so he just said, keep going straight, whatever. Yeah. And then I saw it, and I saw the...
So he was continuously talking to you?
Yeah, it was just like guiding me, and I was like, well, I don't even know where it is. So I had no nav man. This was back in the... back when there was no nav mans invented. So I finally found the hospital, pulled up on the side of the road, got out, he said, go to the second floor. Okay, so I go to the second floor, and
so he said, talked to you again and told you which floor to go?
Something like room. He said, go to 212 or whatever it was, or 2 something, whatever, 221 or something. So I got in this room, and sure enough, the girl whose daughter I'm talking about, she was sitting on the bed with the other girl that had a baby up the hallway. Yeah. And I looked at her and said, oh, hi, how you going, whatever, and she said, oh, hi Lee, how you going? And I said, oh, where's the bubby? She said, oh, it's having some tests. And she got up immediately, obviously, it was an emotional thing because the baby wasn't doing too well. Right. But this girl walked and went down the hallway, and I stood in the doorway, and as I saw him go past, I saw him keep going. So I walked in the thing, and the little bassinet cot thing made out of clear glass or clear plastic was sitting over against the wall. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, well, God, you told me to come here, what am I supposed to do? Unbeknown to me, the baby was born mongoloid. and it had an extremely large head.
And you saw those head?
Yeah, it was. What it was, about 5 minutes later, wasn't even probably that. The doctors came wheeling the bubby in and put it in the bassinet. So anyway, I sort of like looked at the baby and I, looked at it. It was a bit odd. It was misshapen, a bit squarish and big part here, and I thought, sugars. Yeah. So anyway, I said, well, what do you want to do? And she said it was the most bizarre thing, and that's where Jesus sort of came into the highlight of my belief. It was always God, but you didn't understand what Jesus played a part. Because I never studied it. It wasn't my thing. As long as I was in love with God, that's all that mattered to me. And then I went over to the cot and he said, say to the baby, put your hand on its head and tell the baby that Jesus said everything's going to be fine.
Right.
And I thought, well, the baby doesn't understand English. It's about 3 days old, or whatever it was just newborn. So I went over and put my hand on its head and I said, look, Jesus just said to come here and tell you that you're going to be okay. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm obedient. I don't care what God told me to do. I couldn't even tell me to swim to Africa. I'd still do it. So, I just did what he said and I walked out and I couldn't see the lady anymore and the girl. I can't say her name just in case. I've never told her anyway. But so anyway, I went downstairs, drove home. I said, thanks God. I hope everything's okay with the bubby and that. Anyway, 13 months went past and my son was born the month before. Right. I still remember the date. So I was watering the lawn at the front and I saw this car come around the corner, in this cul-de-sac and pulled into their mother's driveway, and the mum got out and I chucked away, whatever, and the back door opened all by itself, and this little girl got out, long blonde hair and all sort of stuff, and started walking to the front door and said, hi Grandma, I've come to visit, how you going, whatever, and I just completely forgot. This is a year and a bit later. I didn't even remember I'd done it. And then I just thought, that's the kid. That's the baby. That's the baby. And I just stood there. I didn't even, everything just went blank and I went...
And did the child look...
Perfect. It was perfectly normal.
Yeah, perfectly normal.
And then...
So everything
the other
was
sister,
right.
So the other sister lived around the corner. Her husband was my mate.
Yeah.
So, about a week later I went down and had a coffee with him and, said hello or whatever. I said, how's she going with the bubby now? It had a few problems when it was young, just testing the water, Yeah. He said, no, man, it's perfect. Yeah. Everything's fine. Oh. Walk, talk, she's starting, to do the 1+1 or the reading the Bambi books, whatever they do when they're about, 1 or 2 years old, whatever, And I went, what? And she goes, yeah, she talks and everything to Grandma. And I went, I just couldn't believe my ears. I just And then, before this actually happened, I'd seen quite a few small miracles and God had told me to do a lot of different things that are a bit odd to the average person, but I did them and it paid off.
So you've heard God speak quite a lot of times, and because you've always been talking to Him since you were young, and He's been eventually speaking back.
But He never spoke back when I was a kid.
Not when you were a kid, but
He only said that one time. He said, the arrow's there, so I sort of looked down. Yeah. But then for a long time He never spoke, and I just thought, I don't know, He's just testing me or testing my faith over a long time before He speaks to me. Yeah. And it wasn't until I got to about probably late 20s that I actually started to hear His voice quite regularly. Yeah. And then one day, my mate, who was a Bible scholar, he kept saying, Lee, you need to go to Bible college. You know a lot, but you don't know everything. And I said, well, I failed school. I'm a bit of a hopeless case when it comes to that sort of stuff. Right. He said, just go. You'll be right. Yeah. So I looked at all the subjects of the Bible and I said, I'll do Old Testament history, the history of the Jews. All that. I said, I'll do it. So I went and done it at a college in Bayswater there. Great teaching, lovely people. Anyway, the class was about 15, 20 people, I think, whatever, all different ages. Yeah. So anyway, about the third or fourth time I went to the class, I enjoyed it actually, I really loved doing it, learning about history and stuff. So I walked in class late. I was actually late for the class. I was going to get in trouble here. Anyway, the pastor and 2 guys were on the pulpit, on the stage there. Yeah. And he said, look, has anyone got a healing ministry? Could you come up and pray for this young girl? Right. And I sort of thought I had, I'd always prayed for people and they seemed to get by, so... Anyway, so I walked up there and said, I'm a bit late, sorry sir, I'll come up there and pray. So anyway, I was standing next to her shoulder here, so I was basically standing there, and the other 2 this guy here had moved round here, so those 2 were down there, and the teacher was standing behind him, he's a tall boy, quite a tall guy. And I was down there. Anyway, I said, just lay hands on her and pray for her that her back gets healed. So as I've gone to touch her shoulder, I must have been this far from her shoulder, and God said loud and clear, stop. Stop. And I just went, and stop. Look, I said, what's wrong? Under my breath. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, she's lying. Yeah. She doesn't have a back problem. She has a jealousy problem with her best friend.
Has a jealousy problem,
So,
right?
yeah, and obviously that was mucking up her belief. Something was going cockeyed in the spiritual world.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
And I thought it was really odd. How do you get a jealousy problem out of a back problem? You know what I mean? Anyway, so she was just covering it up. She just wanted to save the embarrassment of jealousy as to, oh, it's easier with a back problem, you know what I mean? Hopefully God will just heal both at the same time, that sort of stuff, you know. A lot of people do that. So anyway, so I said, okay, Lord, so I just didn't pray for it, I didn't do a single thing, I just stopped. Anyway, after class, or halfway through class I should say, we had to have a smoko break, like a half an hour coffee break. We go to this coffee break and she's talking to a couple of girls at the counter where you get your coffee and all sort of stuff, and there was a bookshelf over there. So God said, tell her. So when I said, oh, I never even spoke to this girl my whole life.
So God spoke to you again
Yeah,
and said, tell her about the jealousy problem.
Yeah, yeah. So I went over and said, oh, can I talk to you for a sec? And she sort of like looked at her, you know, girlfriend like, looked at me really odd, and I said, I just want to have a chat to you.
Yeah.
And so we went over to the other side of the room where the bookshelf was, there was no one there, and she was leaning up against the banister. It was like a double story with a banister there. And I said, look, I said, God talks to me, whether you believe it or not, I'm not interested. I'm just going to tell you what he told me to tell you. He said, you lied. You don't have a back problem.
Yeah.
And she dropped her head, so I knew I was right.
Yeah.
I said, you have a severe jealousy problem with your best friend and something's going a bit skew with your life. I don't know what it is, but I'm just telling you what God told me to tell you. Is it true? And she just poured tears down her face.
Yeah.
And she just couldn't answer because she was a bit emotional.
Crying, yeah.
And I said, I'm going to give you some advice from God. You need to go and get prayer, but not from your pastor. Why, I have no idea. Just some people don't accept things. Prophets are, you know what I mean, the thing in the Bible says prophets accepting someone else's land. So I said, look, go to a different pastor. Wherever you feel comfortable. Drive down the road and just past the church and just pop in and get a pastor to pray for you for the real reason.
Yeah.
And it'll be sorted. I said, do not go to your own pastor. Now, God must have known her own pastor may have been a bit skewy for you, don't know.
Right.
Some pastors are a bit odd, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, so she went and, after that, when I was to see her, everything was fine.
Everything was fine?
Yeah, everything was fine.
Okay. So just on closing now, so when you were a child, 5 years old, you're looking for this arrow, and God said, look down at your feet, and it was there, picked it up, and later on in your early 20s,
well, mid to late 20s more.
Late 20s, you're driving along the road, you come to a fork, and he spoke to you again and said, turn left.
Clear. You said, turn left and go to King Edward Hospital.
And then told you which hospital to go to.
I've never even heard of King Edward
Directed you all the way into the hospital.
Up to the second floor.
Up to the second floor, which room to go to. And then there was a sick...
and it was the lady that
Mongolized
baby.
Which you knew people.
Yeah, and I knew a mother and the two sisters,
And you didn't know they were there until you got there.
Until I got there and I saw her.
Then the voice spoke to you and
said, pray for her and tell her Jesus. And that was the part that I never heard before. I never heard the Jesus part of God.
Yeah.
I wasn't educated about that. To me it was just God, love God, love God.
So I told you that to touch her and said, Jesus said everything will be alright.
Okay.
And then you walked out.
Yeah.
And then
13
months later.
13 months later.
13 months later.
My son was a year old.
Yeah.
So he was 1 month older than her. I remember that distinctly. So she was 13 months old, Jessie was 12 months old.
And then she pulls up in the car next door or something.
Yeah, and I distinctly remember.
And got out, and then you realised that was a baby.
Yeah, it took me a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I'm like, oh yeah, and she had a baby.
That's
and
amazing.
it just dawned on me. That's the kid.
All right. Fantastic.
It's amazing.
So I think it's your relationship, and you're talking to him all the time. And
yeah, well, when, like I said to you before, the most important thing in the Bible for me, the most profound thing, all other things aside, they're all precious, obviously God's word is very precious, but it was when the guy died and went to heaven and he stood before God and he said to God, I've driven out demons in your name, I've healed people, whatever, and God said, get away from me, I never knew you.
Yeah.
It was because he did all the things that pastors do sometimes to make themselves look great in front of the people. You know, to be accepted, to cover up their insecurities, whatever it may be. So they didn't know him.
So you want to really know him.
So I knew I was on the right track by saying, I don't have to be famous. I don't have to be the super healer. I don't have to be these blokes on the pulpit. I don't have to be that. Just do what he says. Everyone's got a job, and you may think it's minuscule, but if it saves someone's life, it doesn't matter. That guy can save 20 people's lives, and you save someone from dying who's going to be the next big preacher to save 5,000 lives. Okay. You don't understand what you're doing, you know what I mean? It's God's plan, not ours.
Thanks very much for that, Les.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime,
buddy.
I've got a few more stories, but...
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, probably great.
Okay, so we thank Lee here for explaining these testimonies, which he has all the time through his life of God speaking to him. So that's all from us for now. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.
See you guys.